The chains were cold. That was the first thing he noticed. Not the 300 faces packed shoulder to shoulder, not the torches guttering against the dark, not the red moon hanging low enough to bleed. Silver bit into his wrists like it had been waiting 20 years for this exact night. He did not flinch. A man does not stand that still by accident. Stillness like that is built, earned, paid for, one swallowed word at a time. The executioner stepped forward, stopped, then stepped back again, and no one in that circle could have told you why. The charges came. The voice reading them shook at the edges. Strange for a man so certain of his verdict. Strange, too, the way the elders kept glancing at the prisoner's hands, as if they were afraid the silver might not be enough. 300 wolves held one breath together, and beneath the silver, beneath the skin, beneath 2 decades of a silence no one had ever thought to question, something that had been sleeping a very long time opened its eyes. The chains were cold. That was the first thing Edrin noticed. Not the crowd, not the torches burning orange against the night sky, not the sound of 300 wolves holding their breath at once, just the cold. Silver links pressed into his wrists like the metal had been waiting for him. Patient, the way a trap is patient. The way certain kinds of betrayal are patient, building quietly for years before they finally close around you. Edrin Voss stood in the center of the execution circle and did not move. He was 52 years old, broad across the shoulders in the way that men who have carried real weight tend to be. Not the kind of broad that comes from training, the kind that comes from decades of standing between something dangerous and something worth protecting. His hair had gone gray at the temples, silver threading through dark, the way frost moves into old bark. His face was weathered, still. The kind of still that is not the absence of feeling, but the long practice of mastering it. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at his son. Cade Voss stood 20 feet away, on the other side of the circle, 28 years old, strong. The Voss build, broad chest, set jaw, the particular way of standing that said, "I am not moving from this spot." He was wearing the formal markings of the Voss bloodline on his collar. Standing next to his uncle, Edrin looked at his son for a long time. And then Cade looked away first. That was the moment. Not the chains. Not the charges being read aloud by a man whose voice shook slightly at the edges. Not the crowd, not the torches, not the blood moon hanging overhead like something that had arrived specifically to witness. Cade looked away first. And something inside Edrin, something that had been holding on for 20 years, quietly let go. Stop. Go back. Because you need to understand something before you see what happens next. You need to understand what kind of man stands in an execution circle without flinching. What kind of man watches his son turn away and doesn't break. You need to understand what 20 years does to a person. What 20 years of choosing silence actually costs. Edrin Voss was 32 years old the night he made the decision. The battle had ended 3 hours before. The kind of battle that doesn't have a clean ending. No final charge, no triumphant moment. Just a slow, terrible quiet as the fighting stopped and the surviving wolves began to realize what the cost had been. He was lying in the grass at the edge of the Voss territory. The wound in his side was deep, real. He had taken a blade meant for one of his youngest fighters, a boy of 19 who had his whole life ahead of him. And the blade had found a home between Edrin's ribs instead. He was going to live. He knew that much, but lying there in the wet grass, bleeding, listening to his pack count its dead, that was when Iron spoke. Not out loud, never out loud inside. In the place behind thought where the wolves lived, a voice like something ancient and dark and completely certain. They will come for you. Edrin closed his eyes. He had known about iron and granite his entire life. Known the way you know about something that lives inside your own chest, not as information but as presence, as weight. His father had told him quietly when Edrin was 12 years old. Sat him down in the study. looked at him with the particular seriousness of a man passing along a burden he wished he didn't have to pass. The double wolves of the Voss bloodline, his father had said. Iron and granite. They haven't shown themselves in 4 generations. They chose you. What does that mean? Edrin had asked. It means the other packs will never let you lead in peace. He had understood. Even at 12, he had understood. Power like that draws attention the way blood draws wolves. The larger packs, the ones that had tolerated the Voss territory, because the Voss were strong but not threatening, would not tolerate a double wolf alpha. Not for long. Not ever. So Edrin had learned to hide, not perfectly, not always. There had been moments over the years, in battle, in moments of extreme danger, when iron or granite had surged forward without asking permission. When something in a fight had shifted in a way that couldn't be easily explained. He had always managed to contain it, always managed to make it look like something else. But lying in the grass that night, wounded, listening to his pack count its dead. They will come for you, Iron said again. Now that you've shown what you are, now that they've seen, because the battle had not been clean. The other pack had been larger, better armed, and they had been winning. Right up until the moment they weren't. Right up until the moment Edrin had stopped holding back, and the tide had turned in a way that left the enemy wolves shaken and fleeing and asking each other in the dark what exactly they had witnessed. Word would travel. Word always traveled. If you seal us, Granite said, the second voice, quieter than iron, more deliberate, steadier, they will have no reason to come. A wounded alpha with no wolves, no threat, no war. Edrin stared up at the sky. He thought about his pack. The 19-year-old boy whose life he'd just saved, the families, the children, the territory his father had built, and his grandfather before that. He thought about the war that was coming if word spread about what he was. He thought about how many of those children would still be alive in 5 years if he sealed Iron and Granite away tonight. In this field, alone. It will hurt, Granite said simply. I know, you will not be able to undo it easily. I know. A long silence. Inside and outside both, then Iron. Quieter than Edrin had ever heard him. You understand what you're giving up. It wasn't a question. Edrin pressed one hand against the wound in his side. Felt the blood still moving. Felt the night air on his face. Felt the weight of what he was about to choose. I understand, he said. He built the seal alone. No ceremony, no ritual. Just a man lying in wet grass, making the hardest choice of his life, locking 2 ancient wolves into the deepest part of himself, and stepping away from the door. It took everything he had. When it was done, he lay there for a long time. Not unconscious, just empty in a way he had never felt before. Like a house after all the rooms have been cleared out, still standing, walls intact, structurally sound, but hollow in every direction. His brother found him an hour later. Aldrick Voss, 6 years older, always 6 years older, which had always been, in Aldrick's mind, 6 years more entitled to certain things. He came with 2 warriors and a look of concern so practiced it could have been genuine. Brother, he said, you're alive, apparently, Edrin said. The pack is saying things. About the battle. About what they saw. Aldrick crouched down. Met his eyes directly. I told them it was adrenaline. Told them a wounded man's perception is unreliable. Thank you. You need to rest. Let me handle things for now. And Edrin, exhausted, hollow, in pain, had yes. For now, that was 20 years ago. For now had a way of becoming permanent when no one bothered to interrupt it. The first year, it made sense. Edrin healed slowly. The wound left a scar that pulled when the weather changed. He was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. The seal on Iron and Granite cost something every day, a slow, steady drain that never quite stopped. Aldrick managed the pack business. Made decisions, handled disputes. Just until you're stronger, Aldrick said. The second year, you're still recovering. Let me handle this. The third year, nothing. No explanation offered. None asked for. By the 5th year, The story had solidified the way stories do when no one bothers to correct them. Brave Alpha, wounded in battle, lost his wolves in the trauma. His brother Aldrick had stepped up. Strong, capable, decisive Aldrick. Good thing he was there. Edrin heard the story. Let it stand. Because here was the thing about 20 years of silence. It was never passive. People wanted to believe it was passive. Wanted to believe that a man who said nothing was a man who had nothing to say. Easier that way. More comfortable. But Edrin said nothing with great precision. He said nothing about Aldrick's version of events. He said nothing about the meetings where decisions were made without him. He said nothing when his own fighters, men who had bled beside him, began turning to Aldrick for direction out of habit. He said nothing because he was watching every conversation in the Great Hall. Every alliance made and unmade. Every elder who was purchased, and every warrior who stayed loyal because loyalty was simply who they were. 20 years of watching. 20 years of cataloging. 20 years of learning exactly what the territory looked like, and who held it and how tightly. "You are still hiding," Iron said sometimes, muffled behind the seal, like sound through a thick wall. "After all this time, I know what I'm doing," Edrin would answer. A pause. "Do you?" He didn't always answer that part. He had a room in the eastern wing of the keep, smaller than the one he'd shared with his wife before she died. Fever, 11 years ago, quick and unsparing the way fevers sometimes are. Furnished simply. A table, 2 chairs, a window that looked out over the old training grounds. He spent his mornings there. Reading. Watching Cade had learned to walk on those training grounds. Edrin remembered it with the kind of clarity that certain memories have. Not because they were dramatic, but because he had replayed them so many times they'd worn grooves into his mind. The boy's determined face. The way he kept getting up every time he fell. The way he never cried. Stubborn from the very beginning, Edrin had spent hours watching from this window. Hands around a cup of tea that went cold, feeling something so large it had no name that fit it. Pride. Fear. Both at once. Neither one the whole story. Solvane had been different, more cautious, more observant, quicker to read the unspoken currents of a room. She was 23 now, and she had her mother's instincts. She noticed things. Edrin sometimes caught her watching him the way he watched everything else, quietly. Without announcing that she was doing it, neither of his children knew the truth. They knew the story, the heroic battle, the tragic injury, the lost wolves. Aldrick had told it so many times with such consistency that it had calcified into fact. The way anything does when no one challenges it long enough. And Edrin had never corrected it, because if he corrected it, if he explained, everything else would follow. Iron and granite, the seal. The reason behind the seal, and then the children would understand what their father had given up for them before they were even born. And Edrin didn't want that. Didn't want them carrying that. Didn't want them looking at him with something that felt like gratitude for a sacrifice they had never asked for and couldn't have prevented. Some burdens are not meant to be shared. Some choices belong only to the one who made them. The moment that changed everything did not feel like a moment. It felt like an ordinary Wednesday. Edrin was crossing the corridor near the council chamber, carrying nothing, going nowhere in particular, moving the way a man moves when he has learned to make himself invisible through 2 decades of quiet practice. When he heard voices through the half-open door, he stopped, not because the voices were raised, because one of them was Aldrick's, and Aldrick's voice had a specific quality when he was performing confidence rather than feeling it. A tightness at the edges. A fraction of a second too much control. Edrin had spent 20 years learning to hear that difference. He stood in the corridor. Did not move closer. Did not need to. The territory surveys from the southern border, said another voice. Rannick, 70 years old. Silver-haired. The longest-serving council member from their father's era, which made him also the one most likely to remember things, Aldrick wished he wouldn't. Those need to go to the council before the spring meeting. I'll handle the presentation, Aldrick said, as always. Of course. Though, Rannick paused. Some of the newer members have been asking questions about the original land grants, the agreements their fathers signed. They want to understand the foundation of the current structure. Old documents. Pre-injury protocols. None of them relevant under current governance. Aldrick. Rannick's voice dropped slightly. I'm telling you as someone who has served this family for 50 years. There are questions about whether the current structure is legally sound. Some of the older agreements specifically named Edrin as the signing authority, not the bloodline generally, not the family, him, by name. Silence, then Aldrick. And now the performance was gone entirely. What remained underneath was something older and considerably colder. Edrin is a man without wolves. A man without wolves has no standing under pack law to hold territorial authority. That is established precedent. Everyone knows the story you've told them, Rannick said carefully. That is not quite the same thing as established precedent. The silence that followed was a different kind. Heavier. The kind that has weight. I trust, Aldrick said finally, that your loyalty to this family is not something I need to question. My loyalty to this family, Rannick said, is exactly why I am having this conversation with you. Edrin stood in the corridor. He picked up the tea tray he had set on a side table. Someone had left it there, already cold, forgotten, and carried it to the kitchens. He did not speed up, did not slow down. Set the tray down, nodded to the kitchen staff. Walked back to his room, sat down in one of his chairs. Looked out at the training grounds. You heard, Iron said, behind the seal. Muffled but present. The way sound carries through a door you thought was closed. I heard, and? Edrin was quiet for a long moment. I'm thinking. You've been thinking for 20 years. Then a little longer won't hurt anything. 6 weeks after that corridor conversation, Aldrick called a council session, not a full gathering. Just the core leadership, elders, senior warriors, the ranking bloodline members. The kind of meeting where the real decisions were made and later presented to everyone else as conclusions already reached. Edrin was never formally invited to these sessions. He was also never formally excluded. That was Aldrick's method. Keep the door technically open. Never create a moment of clear rejection that could be pointed to later. Just let the natural drift do the work. He attended anyway. He walked in 5 minutes late. Late enough to be noticed. Early enough that the meeting hadn't properly begun, and took the seat at the far end of the table. Nobody said anything. Some of the elders exchanged glances. Aldrick's expression went briefly rigid before reassembling into something that looked like warmth. Edrin. Good of you to join us. I live here, Edrin said pleasantly. It seemed appropriate. A few faces at the table suppressed reactions that weren't quite smiles. Aldrick moved on Malwar patrol rotations. Harvest distribution. A dispute between two warrior families that had been grinding on for months. Then the land surveys. Aldrick placed maps on the table. Red drawings of the southern territory. Administrative reorganization, he explained. Cleaner boundary lines. More efficient management. Several parcels that had been under the Edrin Voss Alpha Seal were being transferred to Joint Council authority. Efficiency, Aldrick said. Pure administration. Most of the council nodded. This was how it went. Aldrick presented. The council confirmed. Things moved forward. Which seal? Edrin asked. Everyone looked at him. The documents, Edrin said. The original land grants. Which seal are you removing them from? I explained. The administrative restructuring. Yes, but every parcel in the Southern Territory was granted under a specific seal. My father's in 2 cases. Mine in the rest. Edrin looked at the maps. If you're moving that authority, you need the original sealing party to consent in writing, or a ruling from the full Alliance Council. Not a presentation to the inner council on a Tuesday morning, a silence. The kind of silence that happens when a room realizes something has shifted. "Your wolves," Aldrick said carefully, "are gone, brother. The authority transferred to you." "Yes." I remember the explanation. Edrin looked up from the maps. "Show me the document where I signed it over." Another silence. "Longer. These processes were handled informally during your recovery period." "Show me the document." No one moved. Edrin looked around the table. At the elders. At the warriors. At faces that had accepted 20 years of administrative reality without asking the questions that were now sitting in the middle of the room. "I ask," he said, "because I'm curious about the paperwork." "Only that." He stood, nodded to the table, "Carry on," and walked out behind him. The silence held for 10 seconds. Then everyone began talking at once. Dreva Holt arrived in late autumn. She arrived the way certain kinds of dangerous things arrive. Beautifully. And with excellent manners. 27 years old. Dark-haired. The kind of composed that isn't coldness but precision. Every word chosen. Every expression calibrated. Nothing left to chance or accident. She came from the Holt bloodline, which was not particularly powerful in terms of wolves, but was extraordinarily powerful in terms of political connections. 3 generations of carefully arranged marriages. The ability to be in exactly the right room at exactly the right moment, consistently, for decades running. Cade was captivated within a week. Edrin watched. He watched how she spoke to Cade, always building him up, always making him feel larger than the room required, always position herself as the steady voice of reason standing just behind his gut instincts. He watched how she spoke to Aldrick, respectful, deferential, never challenging directly. He watched how she avoided speaking to Edrin at all during her first 3 weeks in the keep. When she finally did, it was deliberate. He was in the garden, the one his wife had planted 20 years ago. Still maintained exactly as she'd left it. The same roses along the southern wall, the same lavender border, the same stone bench oriented toward the afternoon light. Edrin came there sometimes. Not for comfort exactly, more for continuity. The feeling of something that had not changed. Dreva appeared at the garden entrance. Looked at him. Walked in without being invited. Sat down across from him without being asked. He waited. "You're very patient," she said. Observational, not accusatory. "I've had practice." She looked at him directly. Most people didn't do that. Most people looked somewhere slightly to the side of his face, the way you look slightly away from something too bright to hold. Dreva looked directly. "I know what you are," she said. Edrin said nothing, which was, in its way, its own answer. "I know about iron and granite. My family keeps records. The kind most bloodlines have forgotten or thrown away. The Holts kept theirs." She paused. "I am not here to threaten you." "No," Edrin said. "You're here to suggest I leave voluntarily before I become a problem." Something shifted in her expression. A fraction of surprise she hadn't expected to feel. She had expected him to be slower. "You should consider it," she said. "Cade's future is bright. The pack is stable. Your presence here, the questions it creates, disrupts that. Does it? You know it does." Edrin looked at her for a moment, then, "You know what I find interesting." She waited. "You came to me first. Not to Aldrick, not to Cade." He picked up his cup. "Which means you understand that I am the actual problem. Not the story, not the questions the new council members are asking. Me." He took a sip. "That is a very precise read of the situation." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm telling you because there are ways this ends quietly and ways this ends badly. I prefer the burst version." "So do I." "Then we understand each other." "Not quite." Edrin set down the cup, met her eyes. "You know what I carry. Which means you know what becomes possible if I stop choosing to be quiet." He stood. "Think carefully about whether this conversation was the right move." He walked back inside, left her sitting in his wife's garden. Behind the seal, iron made a sound that might, in some other context, have been amusement. Edrin did not respond to it. The engagement between Cade and Dreva, was announced 4 months later. Aldrick organized the celebration. Of course he did. He organized everything. Had been organizing everything for 20 years. With the particular energy of a man who had confused being in charge with being indispensable, the great hall was full. Every elder, every warrior family, every member of the pack with any claim to standing. Long tables, good food. The particular warmth of a community that believes it has something worth celebrating. Edrin sat at the family table, third seat from the head. The position he had occupied for years, close enough to maintain the appearance of inclusion, far enough to confirm the reality of his standing. He had chosen this seat deliberately, long ago. Appearing to accept reduced circumstances was more useful than contesting them. Contesting drew attention. Acceptance made you invisible. He was watching. Cade stood at the head of the table beside Aldrick, tall, proud, Dreva at his arm. She was already wearing the Voss colors, technically premature for an engagement celebration. A small detail. The kind of small detail that means everything to the person paying attention. She is efficient, Granite said. Behind the seal? She is, Edrin agreed silently. Do you understand what she's building? The groundwork. Yes, she isn't here for Cade. No, she wants the pack. She wants to control it through him. And through Aldrick? Edrin watched his brother give the toast. Voice carrying well. It always had, one of his genuine gifts. Talking about the strength of the Voss line. About the future. About the importance of the right partnerships. Aldrick, Edrin said silently, is a tool she'll use and then set down when she no longer needs it. He always has been the right kind of person for that role without knowing it. And Cade? Edrin watched his son across the hall. Cade was laughing, genuinely, the way he laughed when he forgot to perform being the Alpha's heir and was just a young man at a party. His whole face changed when he laughed like that. Cade, Edrin said, is not a tool to her. He's a permanent position. There is a difference, but he won't see it, not yet. Not for a while. Solvain, seated 2 chairs to his left, did not lift her cup immediately when everyone else lifted theirs. She lifted it a moment late. Eyes on her father. An expression Edrin couldn't quite read from the corner of his vision. He didn't look at her directly, not yet. But soon the formal charges came 3 months later. Edrin was not surprised. He had been watching the timeline the way you watch weather coming in from the west. You can't stop it, but you can stop pretending it isn't on its way. Dreva had moved faster than he'd calculated. He had assumed she would wait for the political groundwork to settle further. But she was efficient, and she had understood something from their conversation in the garden. He was not going to leave voluntarily, which meant the window was closing. She brought 3 elders to Aldrick with documents. Correspondence, convincingly rendered, the kind of forgery that requires skills and access to old writing samples, suggesting that Edrin had been in secret contact with the Grievorn pack, the historical enemy of the Voss territory, suggesting meetings arranged in the dark. Information passed across borders. The charges were read aloud at a full pack gathering. Edrin stood in the great hall and listened to 20 years of his silence being turned into evidence against him. He never spoke because he was planning this. He stayed quiet to avoid drawing suspicion. A man with nothing to hide doesn't hide. The logic was circular the way good lies always are. Airtight because it explains everything, including the proof of innocence. He looked at Cade during the reading. Cade's face was complicated. There was loyalty there. To Aldrick, to the version of the family he had been given, to the future that Dreva had been carefully constructing around him. But there was something else also, a flicker. The look of someone being asked to walk away from something he isn't entirely sure is actually there. He didn't say anything, neither did Solvain. She stood 2 rows back, face completely still, arms at her sides. The look of someone watching a building burn and calculating the wind direction simultaneously. The judgment was swift, execution to be carried out under the blood moon. 3 days. Edrin stood through all of it without comment. When the gathering began to break up, he turned to the elder nearest him. "The papers were very well done," he said. The elder blinked. "Tell whoever made them. They have real skill." Edrin adjusted his collar. "It's a shame to use it this way." He walked back to his room. Edrin was in his room when Solvain knocked. He had been expecting her since the council meeting. Not immediately. She was too careful for immediately. She'd knocked at a reasonable hour, the kind of time that said she had thought about it first. "Come in." She opened the door and stood in the frame for a moment, her mother's way of assessing a room before committing to entering it. Then she came in, closed the door, and did not sit. "That was deliberate," she said. "Which part?" "The meeting. The question about the documents." She folded her arms, not defensively, but thinking. "You knew they didn't have one. I had a reasonable suspicion. You know what happens now. Aldrick will move faster. He'll try to. Yes, formalize things before you can. Yes." "Father." Her voice changed slightly on the word. Not softer, more direct. Something underneath it that hadn't been there before. "Have you always known that the documents didn't exist?" Edrin was quiet for a moment. "Some of it," he said finally. She looked at him the way she had at the party. The expression he hadn't been able to read at the time. He could read it now. Had probably been able to read it for longer than he'd admitted to himself. It was grief, the early kind. The kind that comes before you fully understand what you're grieving. "How long?" she said carefully. "Have you been watching all of this?" He did not look away. 20 years. The room was very quiet. "You let it happen." "I let some of it happen, yes." Why? It was a real question, not accusatory, not rhetorical. She genuinely wanted to know, the way her mother had always wanted to know things. Not to judge, but to understand. To have the actual shape of something rather than the story about it. Edrin was quiet for a long moment. "Sit down," he said. She sat. And he told her, not everything. Not yet, but enough. The wound, the choice, the seal, the decision made lying in wet grass at the edge of the territory, while his pack counted its dead. He told it the way a man tells a hard story, when he has no energy left for anything but the plain truth of it. She listened, without interrupting, without changing her expression visibly. When he finished, the room held the quiet of something that had finally been said. "The document," she said. "The original land grant. The one with your seal?" "Yes. Does it still exist?" "I don't know for certain. I suspect so. My father was careful about paperwork. Aldrick has always been more interested in the current story than the historical record. He may not have thought to look for it." Solvain nodded slowly. She stood, moved toward the door. "I'll look," she said. Solvain. She stopped. "Be careful. Whatever you find, don't move on it without telling me first." She looked at him over her shoulder, and for a moment her expression was something different entirely. Something that looked, in that particular light, startlingly like relief. The kind that comes when a person has been carrying a question for years and has finally been given permission to ask it. "I know," she said, and left. The 3 days before the execution passed slowly. He slept well. People found this troubling when they heard about it later. A man under sentence of death, sleeping without difficulty. It seemed unnatural somehow. Wrong. But Edrin had been making peace with hard things for 20 years. Sleep was not the difficult part. The difficult part had already happened long ago, lying in wet grass while the pack counted its dead. Iron and granite were less quiet than usual. Behind the seal, they moved with a restlessness he hadn't felt since the early years. Not pressing against the boundary, just present. More present than they'd been in a long time. "You're not afraid," Granite observed. "No? Should you be?" "Probably, but you're not." "No?" Edrin lay on his back and looked at the ceiling. "I've been waiting for something for 20 years. Something I couldn't name clearly enough to plan for exactly. This might be it." "You planned for this?" "Not this specifically." "Then what?" A long silence. "I planned for the moment when Aldrick moved so decisively, that the move itself became the evidence. When there was no more fog, no more ambiguity that he could hide inside.
Edrin closed his eyes.
You can't fight a fog, but you can wait for it to lift. Iron was quiet for a moment. Then he's going to kill you. He's going to try. Edrin. I know. We can. Not yet. A pause. You are the most stubborn man, Iron said, with something that was not quite admiration and not quite frustration, but somewhere between the two. Thank you, Edrin said, and went to sleep. The night before the execution, someone slid a piece of paper under his door. He heard it, lay still, then got up and retrieved it from the floor, a single page. Old paper, the kind that had been folded and unfolded many times, preserved carefully somewhere. At the top, the official seal of the Voss Territorial Authority, his father's signature at the bottom, his own, below it the original land grant document. Specific, binding, his name, written in his own hand 22 years ago, as the sole territorial authority for the Voss lands. Not the bloodline, not the family, him by name, with a notary seal that would hold up under any alliance review. And below the signatures, in a handwriting he recognized instantly as his daughter, 4 words. Found it. I'm sorry. Edrin stood in the dark of his room and held the document for a long time. He thought about Solvane, about what it cost her to find this and hold it for however many days she'd carried it, about what it meant that she had calculated when to give it. Not immediately, but at the right moment, he thought about Cade. About a boy of 8 years old being told his father was resting again. The way Cade's chin had set when Aldrick said it, the way children absorb the stories they're given, because the adults in their lives present them as the only truth available. He thought about 20 years, what 20 years means, what it costs, what it builds without your knowing it's being built. He folded the document carefully, placed it inside his shirt against his chest, went back to bed, slept. The execution circle was built from old stone, older than the keep even, older than the Voss claim on this territory. Stone rings worn smooth by weather and years, silver-veined rock that held the cold, the way old things hold memory. Torches at the 4 compass points. 300 wolves packed shoulder to shoulder around the outer ring. Edrin walked in without being pushed or led. The chains were cold, silver links pressed into his wrists. The executioner stepped back. The elder with the formal voice began reading the charges, the official recitation required by law before the sentence was carried out. Edrin did not listen to the words. He looked at Cade. Cade was standing with Aldrick, Dreva at his right shoulder, one hand resting light on his arm. Cade's face was doing something complicated. The younger man visible underneath the adult, underneath all the years of being told who he was and where he came from and what mattered. His jaw was tight. He was not looking at his father until he was, for a moment, across the circle, over the heads of the crowd, over the sound of the formal reading and the torches and the enormous red moon overhead. They looked at each other, and Edrin thought, there you are. There you still are. Then Cade looked away first, and the thing that had been holding on for 20 years, the very last of it, let go. And in the deepest part of Edrin Voss, in the place behind thought, behind will, behind 20 years of careful deliberate choosing, iron moved, not asking, not waiting for permission. The seal that had held for 20 years began to crack from the inside, and the cold of the silver chains, without any warning at all, stopped mattering. The light came first, not a flash, not an explosion. Nothing so theatrical as that, just light, black and gray simultaneously, which should have been impossible, which was the first indication that what was happening had nothing to do with ordinary possibility. It came from inside him, from the place where the seal had been, past tense. Because the seal was gone, 20 years of careful construction, 20 years of daily maintenance, 20 years of carrying a weight that would have broken most men by year 5, gone. In the space of one exhaled breath, The silver chains didn't shatter dramatically. They didn't explode outward in a moment of cinematic triumph. They simply stopped holding. The links parted one by one in quick succession, like a row of dominoes falling sideways, and the pieces hit the stone floor of the execution circle with a series of small, precise sounds. Dot, tick, 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 and then silence. Edrin Voss stood in the center of the circle, the way he always stood, straight, unhurried. The same posture he'd maintained while the charges were read. The same posture he'd carried for 20 years through every meeting where his chair was moved slightly farther from the head of the table. Every conversation where his name was spoken in past tense while he was still in the room. Except now his eyes were different, black and gray. Both colors. Both at once. 300 wolves saw it happen. Later. Much later. In the weeks and months that followed. They would all describe it differently. The warriors, who had served under Edrin in the old campaigns, said the air pressure changed, said it felt like the moment before a lightning strike, when your body understands something before your mind can form the thought. The younger pack members said the light came from underground, from the stone itself. The elders said nothing for a long time. Then the oldest of them, a woman named Vara who had served on the Voss Council since before Aldrick was born, said simply, "I recognize them," and would not say more. But what 300 wolves agreed on, without any variation, was what happened next. From behind, Edrin. From the space between him and the torchlight at the edge of the circle, two shapes emerged from something that was not quite shadow and not quite substance and not quite either. Iron first. Enormous. The size of a working horse, but built low and wide and dense. Black fur that seemed to pull light inward rather than reflect it. Eyes like coals at the precise moment before they become ash. Orange-white interior, intensely present. Muscles moving underneath the fur like slow and absolute machinery. Granite second. Different in every way iron was not. Where iron was dark, granite was the gray of old stone in winter. Compact where iron was massive. Still where iron moved with contained energy. Eyes like deep quartz, pale and utterly unreadable. If iron was the force of a thing breaking, granite was the thing that would not break regardless of what was thrown against it. They came from nothing. They walked to Edrin, and they knelt, not with the quick reflexive submission of a wolf acknowledging its alpha, not performance, not display. They knelt the way old men kneel before something sacred, slowly, deliberately, with full understanding of what the gesture meant and complete intention behind it. Both massive heads lowered, enormous foreheads almost touching the stone. And then stillness complete. The silence in the execution circle was the loudest thing Edrin had ever heard in his life. Aldrick's face went through 5 expressions in approximately 4 seconds. Shock, denial, fear, rapid calculation, and then the particular blankness of a man whose mind has shifted entirely into survival processing. The way a captain's face empties when he sees the size of the wave and understands there is no avoiding it. Drava's hand tightened on Cade's arm. Cade felt it, registered it distantly. The way you register small physical sensations when something enormous is consuming every other channel of your attention. His attention was on his father, on iron and granite kneeling in the stone circle, on the fact that the power he had carried inside him his entire life. The wolf he'd trained with, relied on, been told came from his grandfather's bloodline, through Aldrick's line, was reaching toward iron with the recognition of something that had always known where it came from and had simply been waiting for the distance to close. He felt it in his chest, like a hook finding something to catch on. Pulling. What, he thought, very clearly, is happening. And then Drava's hand tightened again, and she said quietly, directly into his ear, "Stay where you are." He stayed. But something in him didn't. Edrin looked at his brother across the circle. Across 20 years, he didn't speak, didn't move. Just looked. With those changed eyes, black and gray, at the man who had spent 2 decades building a story around the absence of this moment. Aldrick moved first, which was, if you understood Aldrick exactly what he would do. He had always understood that the only answer to being caught off balance was to move faster than the balance required. "This changes nothing," he said. Trained voice. The voice of a man who had been controlling rooms for 20 years. He hid this power. He deceived this pack. For 20 years. That is the charge. That remains the charge. Some faces in the crowd nodded. Some did not. The old warriors. The ones who had stood in formation beside Edrin, before all Aldrick's name carried any weight in this territory, were completely still. The kind of stillness that is not passivity. The kind that is decision happening in real time. Edrin watched all of it. Then he did the thing that no one expected. He turned and walked out of the execution circle. Iron rose, fell into step on his left, granite on his right. 3 figures moving through the gap the crowd opened. Not because anyone commanded it, not because of any authority the judgment had granted, but because of the particular quality of Edrin's expression, and because no one in that circle wanted to be Pemmy the first to find out what happened if they didn't step aside. He went to the old borderlands, the far edge of the Voss territory, where the managed forest gave way to unclaimed wilderness. Land that had been a training ground in his father's time, before the new grounds were built closer to the keep, before the old ones were slowly reclaimed by weather and vine and decades of disuse. He sat on a fallen log that had been there long enough to be almost indistinguishable from the forest floor. Iron lay down to his left, radiating warmth, the way old stone radiates warmth. Not heat exactly, but the long memory of it. Granite sat to his right, still, as always, completely still. Edrin put his hands on his knees, breathed. That was dramatic, Iron said. The chains, the crowd, the whole production of it. A pause. You could have done this at any point over the past 20 years. I know. A decade ago, even. A decade and a half. I know, just noting it. I know, Iron. Granite said nothing for a while. Then, how do you feel? Edrin considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, without rushing toward an answer that sounded right before it was true. Like a house, he said, finally, after everything that had been stored in it for too long has finally been moved out. You can see the actual floor for the first time. But the shape of the space looks strange without the furniture. Iron was quiet for a moment. Then, is that good or bad? I don't know yet. He looked out at the old training ground, the shapes of it still visible under the overgrowth. The intervals between the old marker posts, the depression in the earth where the footwork drills had compacted the soil over years. He had spent thousands of hours in this specific field, a young man learning what his body was capable of. He had brought Cade here once. The boy had been 11. Edrin had tried to show him the old footwork patterns, the same ones his own father had taught him, on this same ground, at more or less the same age. But Cade had been restless, already absorbing from somewhere the message that this kind of thing was outdated, that Uncle Aldrick's training methods were what mattered now. The morning had ended early. Edrin had never tried again. And Cade, Granite said, what about him? You felt it. In the circle. His wolf reaching toward Iron. I felt it. He felt it too. He didn't understand it. But he felt it. Edrin nodded. Said nothing. Give it time, he said finally. Iron made a sound. Somewhere between impatience and resignation. You have been saying that for 20 years. And look how it turned out. A pause. Fair point, Iron said. Solvane came at dawn. Not running. Walking with the deliberate pace of someone who has made a decision and is not going to unmake it between here and there. She came through the borderland trees and stopped at the edge of the old training ground. She looked at Iron and Granite without flinching, which told Edrin something significant. She had expected them, had believed what he'd told her before she had any proof to hold alongside the belief. That kind of faith is not a small thing. She sat down on the log beside him. Not close, not distant. The appropriate distance of two people whose history is being renegotiated in real time, and both of them know it. Neither spoke for a while. I had it for 4 days, she said. I know. I didn't know what to do with it. She was looking at the training ground, not at him. I thought, if I gave it to you before the trial, you would move immediately. And if you moved before the trial, they would manufacture new charges, different evidence, another reason. She paused. I thought it was more useful as insurance? Yes, you were right, Edrin said. She turned to look at him, like that was the last thing she'd expected. You made the correct calculation. You held it until it mattered most. That took patience. He'd looked at her. Your mother would have done exactly the same. Something moved across Solvain's face. Old grief mixing with something newer and harder to name. I didn't come to apologize again, she said. Good. You already did. Once is sufficient. I came because Aldrick called an emergency session last night, after you left the circle. He's moving to formalize the authority transfer through legal channels before you can challenge it. He has elders who will sign whatever he places in front of them. And Dreva is pushing Cade to issue a public challenge to your claim before you can call the Alliance Council. She stopped. How much time do we have? Before Aldrick's council move? 4 days. Before Cade's challenge? I don't know. Dreva works quickly, Edrin nodded. There is something else, Solvain said. He waited. Dreva came to my room. Last night, after the session, she came alone, very composed, even for her. She told me my future in this pack depended entirely on which direction I stood. She said she had no personal interest in removing me from the bloodline leadership path, she said. And this is the exact phrasing, that there was plenty of room for the right kind of loyalty. She offered you a position, Edrin said. She offered me survival with a title attached to make it feel like a choice. What did you tell her? That I needed to think about it. Good. Because I did not want to tell her where I had actually spent the previous 4 days, or what I had been carrying in the inside pocket of my coat. The borderland morning light was coming through the trees now, long pale strips of it across the old training ground. You need to be careful, Edrinson said. She is more dangerous now that the plan is coming apart. Careful people become reckless when the walls start closing. I know. Solvain stood. Breckenwolf sent a messenger this morning. He says he has something for you. She paused, seeming to find the specific phrasing slightly odd. He said to tell you that the northern copy survived. Edrin went very still. Then, slowly, he nodded. Tell him I'll come tonight. Breckenwolf's territory sat 2 hours north of the Voss borderlands. Close enough for the two packs to share a slint line. Far enough for genuine independence on both sides of it. His keep was smaller than the Voss keep, and considerably better maintained. The difference between a man who managed what he had and a man who had spent 20 years performing the management of things that weren't technically his. He met Edrin at the border himself. Alone, no escort, no formality. 2 men who had bled beside each other 3 decades earlier, meeting in the dark at a fence line. They didn't embrace. They sized each other up the way old fighters size each other up, assessing without performing the assessment. You look terrible, Brecken said. I was in chains 6 hours ago. And before that? About the same, Brecken nodded. Apparently sufficient as a medical assessment. He turned and walked toward the keep. They sat in Brecken's study. No fire. 2 lanterns and a bottle of something that was older than either of them. Brecken placed a document case on the table. Edrin looked at it. When did you get it? He asked. Your father gave it to me. Brecken sat back. The year before he died, he said. He paused, recalling the exact words with the precision of a man who had understood they would matter eventually. He said, keep this until Edrin asks for it, or until the situation makes the question unnecessary. He said you would know what it meant when it was time. Edrin opened the case. Inside, a full set of the original territorial agreements. Every land grant, every border covenant, every alliance document, his father's signature, his own, dating back 22 years, and underneath them, one document he had not known existed, a declaration, his father's handwriting, notarized by the Alliance Council of the time, stating clearly that the Voss Alpha Authority was bound specifically to Edrin Voss, not the bloodline generally, not any family member, not a successor designated by another family member, until such time as Edrin formally abdicated or was found in violation of alliance law by the full alliance councils, not the inner council, not the pack elders, not a brother with 20 years of grievance and a willingness to forge correspondence. The full alliance council. Edrin read it twice, then set it down, looked at Brecon. He knew, Edrin said. He suspected, didn't know the exact shape it would take. But he knew Aldrick. Brecon poured 2 glasses. He told me, my younger son will do something extraordinary to protect this pack, and someone will try to use that against him. This document makes it reversible. Edrin picked up the glass. Did not drink yet. I need to call the Alliance Council, he said. I know. That's why I sent the message when I did. Brecon paused. I've already contacted Warwick and Dunmore. They're standing by. You have enough voices for a quorum. Aldrick will try to block it. He'll try. He has 3 days before the formal call becomes binding. Once it's binding, he can't block it without violating the same agreements he's been using to justify his authority. Exactly. They sat with that for a moment. There's something else, Brecon said. Edrin waited. Driva Holt. Before she came to your pack. Before Cade. Brecon turned his glass on the table without drinking it. She was with another alpha, 3 years ago. It ended when he died. His pack says illness. His inner council says something that presented as illness, but raised questions. You have evidence. Not enough for the Alliance Council, but enough to know who she is and how long she's been doing this. Brecon met his eyes. Cade is not her first. He paused. He may be her last if things go the way she intends. The lanterns were steady in the still room. He doesn't know, Edrin said. No. He won't believe it coming from me. Not yet. Edrin was quiet for a long time. He has to find it himself. Yes, Brecon said. That's usually the only way it sticks. For Cade. The finding happened not through investigation, but through a single piece of paper. Driva had left an assets inventory on the desk in their shared study. Not hidden, not deliberately displayed. Just there among other papers. Carelessly. Which was, if you understood Driva, not careless at all. He picked it up. Read it, his first thought. This is thorough. Driva was always thorough. He had always taken this as a virtue. His second thought arrived slower and was considerably heavier, because most of the annotations were written in future tense. This parcel transfers when. This agreement dissolves after. This reserve moves to, and then an account name he didn't recognize. Not the pack account, not the family reserves. A private account. His name was not on it. He set the paper down, picked it up again. His wolf stirred. The same wolf that had reached toward iron at the execution circle, that had felt the hook behind his sternum, pulling towards something it recognized before his mind caught up. It stirred now with the specific agitation of an animal that has caught a scent it doesn't want to follow to its source. Stop, he told himself. She's planning. She's always planning. This is what organized looks like, except organized for whom? He put the paper back exactly where he'd found it. Walked out of the study. Went to the training ground. Hit things for an hour. Didn't feel better. The first assassination attempt came 3 nights after the execution circle. 4 wolves. Moving through the borderland trees in coordinated pairs. Good fighters. Edrin could tell from their movement patterns. Trained. Disciplined. Sound tactical approach. But they were thinking about a man. They were not thinking about what walked beside him. Iron materialized between 2 trees to the left without making a sound, which is genuinely impossible for something that size. And yet granite appeared to the right. Both of them simply stood there, not advancing, not threatening. not making any sound at all, just present. The four wolves stopped, and Edrin watched something very specific happen. Training dissolved. Tactics dissolved. The coordinated approach dissolved entirely, because there is a level of information that bypasses every decision-making process a body has. Bypasses thought, bypasses courage, bypasses whatever a person has been paid or promised. It goes directly to the oldest part of the brain and delivers one message. Not this. The four wolves backed away. Then they ran. Edrin stood in the dark of the borderlands and listened to them go. That, Iron said, was almost disappointing. It was efficient, Granite said. I wanted to. I know what you wanted. Just a little. No. Edrin rubbed his eyes with one hand. Both of you, please, silence. He walked back to the borderlands camp. A rough setup, a bedroll, and a fire, adequate rather than comfortable. He sat down, thought about Dreva. About what it meant that she'd moved this fast. She was scared. Under all the composure, under all the precision. The execution circle had not gone as planned. The seal breaking had not been part of any calculation she had made. She was recalibrating its speed, which meant she was more dangerous now than before. And somewhere in the keep, his son was sleeping next to her. The morning after the assassination attempt, a message arrived. Delivered by Gorse, an older packman who had served the Voss territory since Edrin's father's time, who had no reason to serve Aldrick or Dreva, and plenty of reasons to serve no one at all except the territory itself. Edrin opened it, his son's handwriting. Cade had always pressed too hard, the letters slightly deeper than necessary, like the pen was arguing with the page. I need to talk to you. Alone. Not about choosing sides. I don't know what side anything is on anymore. I just need to talk to you. Cedrin read it twice, wrote one word on the back, handed it to Gorse. Tonight. Cade came at midnight, alone. Through the eastern approach, the old path, the one the territory's children learned before they were old enough for the main gates. He knew this path. Edrin had walked it with him once, 20 years ago almost exactly. Cade barely 8. Edrin teaching the landmarks, this rock, that tree, the way the slope changes at the ravine, the same way his own father had taught him. Cade had complained the entire way. Why do I need to know this? This is old. Uncle Aldrick says the eastern approach isn't used anymore. It isn't used, Edrin had said. That's why you need to know it. Cade hadn't understood then. He understood now. He came into the borderlands camp and stopped at the edge of the firelight. Edrin had been sitting, had known Cade was coming for 10 minutes before he arrived. Iron and Granite's perception operated on a different register than human hearing. He had sent them to the tree line. Not hidden, just not in the first frame of what Cade would see. He wanted his son to be able to look at him first, just him, without everything else in the way. Cade stood at the edge of the firelight for a moment. His father's height, his father's build, his mother's jaw, and his father's eyes. Edrin could see that clearly in the firelight, had always seen it clearly. I don't know where to start, Cade said. Start anywhere. Edrin said. Cade came and sat across the fire, on the ground, cross-legged, the way he'd sat as a child. Neither spoke for a moment. In the circle, Cade said finally. When Iron came out, I felt it. I felt my wolf reach for him, and I couldn't stop it, and I couldn't understand it. I know that's not from my grandfather's bloodline through Uncle Aldrick's side. No, it never was. No. Cade looked at the fire. How long have I been? How long has everything I thought I understood about myself been built on something that wasn't true? The power was never wrong, Edrin said. You're not wrong. A river doesn't run any differently when you finally understand where it actually starts. That's a patient way of looking at it. Patience is what I've had the most of. Silence. The fire. The forest being itself around them. She left papers on the desk, Cade said. Edrin waited. Asset inventories. Everything broken down. Land, reserves, agreements. Transfer structures. My name wasn't on the account the reserves were being moved to. Still Edrin waited. I told myself there was an explanation. Cade's voice was flat. The specific flatness of someone holding weight they've been carrying for longer than they've admitted. I've been telling myself explanations for 3 years. Every time something felt wrong. Every time something about the timing. The decisions she pushed me toward. He stopped. You asked me to stay once. At dinner. 2 years ago. I was already standing to leave and you said just 1 more minute. I said I had somewhere to be. I remember. What were you going to tell me? Edrin looked at his son. That I was proud of you. Nothing else. Nothing strategic. I had watched you handle a situation with the Southern families the week before. You made a call that cost you politically but was right. I wanted to tell you I had seen it, and that I was proud. Cade said nothing for a long time. When he spoke, something in his voice had broken. Quietly, the way things break when they've been under load long enough. I stood next to her. In the circle, when they put the chains on you. She had her hand on my arm and I didn't move. I stood there and I didn't move. Cade, I looked at you. You looked at me, and I looked away. I know. How are you not angry? Edrin was quiet. I am angry, he said. I've been angry for 20 years. I've had a great deal of practice with where to put it, so it doesn't burn everything down. Another silence. What do you need from me? Cade asked, and it landed with the full weight of what it actually was. Not strategy. Not politics. Not positioning. Just a man asking his father, honestly, without knowing the answer, what he needed. The document Solvane found, Edrin said. There's a second complete set, including a declaration from your grandfather that makes everything Aldrick has done for 20 years legally void, but only if it goes before the full Alliance Council. And only the current blood heir has standing to call that council session. That's me, if you choose to be. Cade looked at him across the fire. Andreva? That choice, Edrin said carefully, is yours. I'm not telling you what your marriage is or isn't. I'm telling you what I know. And then it belongs to you. Tell me what you know. So Edrin told him. The way he'd told Solvane, plainly, without embellishment, what Breck Khan had said. The previous alpha. The illness that looked like illness. The pattern that was longer than 3 years. Cade sat with it. The fire burned between them. She's not going to just, Cade said, and then stopped. No, Edrin agreed. She's not. When I leave this camp, she'll know something shifted. She watches everything. Yes, and Aldrick will move as soon as he knows I've been here. Yes. Cade sat for another moment, then stood. He looked at his father, the full, unbroken look, then at iron at the tree line, then at granite. Something moved across his face. Not sudden, the slow kind, recognition arriving from somewhere deep and old and patient. The document, he said. The second set. Where is it? Breckenwolf's study. Cade nodded, turned to go. Cade, he stopped. Edrin looked at his son in the firelight. The 8-year-old who complained about the Eastern approach the whole way. He said. I always meant to tell him he did well. Cade stood with his back half turned. His shoulders moved once. A breath, or the shape of one. Then he walked into the dark. 2 things happened the next morning. In Breckenwolf's study, Cade arrived at dawn and spent 3 hours reading every document in the case. Carefully. Twice. Understanding not just what they said, but what they meant and what they made possible. At the Voss keep, Dreva went to the study and found it empty. Went to the bedroom. Found a cold bed that had not been slept in. She sat down. And for the first time, maybe the actual first time, she recalculated from a position of genuine uncertainty. Because here was the problem with Cade Voss that she had identified early and decided she could manage. He was like his father, not in the ways she had expected. Not in the tactical patience or the years-long silence. In something smaller and considerably harder to work with. In the specific quality of a man who, when he finally decided something, did not undecide it. She had chosen him because she had believed that quality was unpointed. Waiting for direction. She had been providing the direction for 3 years, and now she was wondering, with the particular calm that sits at the very outer edge of real fear, whether she had been pointing it correctly. She went to the window, looked at the training ground. Think, she told herself. You have handled worse situations than this. Except she wasn't entirely sure that was true anymore, because Edrin Voss was alive, with 2 wolves that made trained fighters back away without a word being spoken. With a document her best legal contact had confirmed was airtight under alliance law, with a daughter who had been pretending to consider her offer for 4 days, and had not considered it for a single moment. And now, with a son who had gone somewhere in the night. Move, she told herself. You move or you lose. And she began to plan. The announcement came that afternoon, not from Edrin. From Cade, standing in the great hall. Not a summoned gathering, just the ordinary midday life of the pack moving through its own spaces. He stood at the head of the room and spoke without raising his voice. I am calling a session of the Northern Alliance Council, under the authority of the Voss blood heir, to address questions of territorial governance. He looked around the room steadily. Any alpha with council standing is formally invited to attend. Any member of this pack who wishes to be present as a witness is welcome. The room went quiet. At the back of the hall, Aldrick stood with 2 of his loyal elders, his face doing the rapid calculation, how to block this, how to contest the designation, how to... The documentation of my standing as blood heir, Cade said, is currently held by Brecon Wolf as a neutral party. It is available for inspection by any council member upon request. And he walked out. Edrin heard about the announcement an hour later. He was sitting in the old training ground. Just sitting. Iron and granite nearby. Gorse arrived with a folded paper in Cade's handwriting. 1 sentence. 3 days. Edrin looked out at the worn paths. The overgrown marker posts at their original intervals. He moved faster than I expected, Granite said. He's a Voss, Iron said. With certainty. With something that sounded like pride. Edrin folded the paper. 3 days, he said. Are you ready? He thought about the question seriously. About what ready actually meant for a man who had been moving toward a moment for 20 years, whether the word even applied. Or whether 2 decades of preparation meant that the moment, when it arrived, felt less like an event and more like a long sentence finally reaching its period. Yes, he said. He stood, and the old training ground was quiet around him. Patient the way old places are patient. The way certain things are patient that don't need to hurry, because they understand that time is on their side. The way, it turned out, some men were too. Dreva moved on the 2nd day. She moved the way she always moved. Efficiently, without visible panic, with the precision of a woman who had decided the only answer to a collapsing situation was to collapse it herself in a controlled direction before it fell on her. She went to the council elders, the 3 who had always confirmed whatever Aldrick placed in front of them. 1 hour with each privately. Edrin didn't know exactly what was said, but he knew the shape of what would have been said. The future has already been decided. Choose the right side now, before the choice is made for you. 2 of the 3 agreed. The 3rd, Carrick, who had served the Voss territory since Edrin's father's time, sent a message to the Borderlands camp, short. In the careful handwriting of a man who had spent 60 years being precise with words, she told me the Alliance Council would rule in Aldrick's favor if I supported the procedural motion. I asked on what basis. She said she had assurances from 2 council members. I know those 2 men. They will vote whichever way costs them least on the morning of the session. This is not assurance. This is a woman estimating. A pause in the writing. A longer gap between sentences. I have served this territory since your father's time. I am sorry for the years of silence. I should have spoken sooner. I am speaking now. Edrin read it, then read it again. Carrick, Granite said. Yes, he was one of the ones your father trusted most. I know. He has been carrying this for 20 years. He has. Edrin folded the letter. People carry things differently. Some carry them until they physically can't anymore. Some wait until the moment that setting it down costs less than continuing to hold it. You're not angry at him. No? Why not? Because I understand what it costs, Edrin said. To stay silent when speaking would change things. I'm not in any position to be angry at someone for knowing that cost too well. Solvane came on the evening of the second day, not to the borderlands, through gorse. Meet me at the old garden. Midnight, the garden his wife had planted, inside the keep's eastern wall, growing unchecked now for years, doing what gardens do when people stop managing them and simply let them be. Edrin came over the eastern walls at 10 minutes before midnight. Old habit. The wall was lower at the corner, and the ivy had grown structural. Solvane was already on the stone bench, the one oriented toward the roses. The roses were enormous now. Too much of everything. Beautiful the way unmanaged things sometimes are. She heard him come over the wall and didn't turn. You still do that, she said. The gate makes noise. It's made noise for 15 years. You could have fixed it. I liked knowing who was coming. She turned to look at him. Even in the low light, he could see the tiredness in her face. The kind that comes from performing composure for so long that the muscles themselves start to protest. He sat beside her. For a while, neither spoke. She went to 3 people today, Solvane said. I know. Carrick told me. She's planning to challenge the council's authority to hear the case at all. If she gets 2 members to abstain on procedural grounds, it doesn't reach quorum. Existing structure stays in place pending a new session, which Aldrick controls the timing of. I know. Then what? I know, Solvane. She stopped. Looked at him. You're not worried. I'm exactly as worried as the situation requires. And how worried is that? Not very. She made a sound. Somewhere between frustration and something that might, in a different moment, have become reluctant amusement. His wife used to make that sound. He had forgotten that until this exact moment. You have something, she said. I have several things. Tell me. He looked at the overgrown roses. Your grandfather left a document with Brecken Wolf, a declaration binding the Alpha Authority specifically to me. Not the bloodline, not a designated successor, me, until I formally abdicate or am found in violation of alliance law by the full council. Not the inner council, the full council, which means everything Aldrick has done, is legally void from the beginning. Yes, Solvane was very still. When Dreva finds out, she already suspects. She's moving on the procedural challenge because she's trying to establish the council's authority before I can undermine the basis on which the council granted Aldrick anything in the first place. It's a race. It's always been a race, Solvane said quietly. I've had a 20-year head start. She turned to look at him directly. The moonlight was clear and unobstructed in the garden. Are you going to win? Edrin considered the question with the full seriousness it deserved. Yes, he said. How certain? Certain enough. He looked at his daughter. There's something I need you to do. Tell me, tomorrow morning, early, before the session starts. I need you to go to Cade and say what? Nothing, just be there. He paused. He's going to have a difficult day, and he's going to try to go through it alone, because that's what he'll believe he should do. I need someone to be in the room when he decides that's wrong. Solvane was quiet for a moment. You could go yourself, she said. He needs to see you, his sister. Not me. Edrin looked at the roses. I've been his father from a distance for too long. Changing that takes time and more than one conversation. What he needs tomorrow is someone who has known him the whole way through and is standing clearly beside him. That's you, not me, not yet. A long silence. You planned this, Solvane said. Not accusingly, observationally. Not all the specifics. But the shape of it. You've been planning the shape for a long time. Planning is too strong a word. What word would you use waiting for the pieces to arrive in the right positions? That's planning. It's considerably slower. She made the sound again. His wife's sound. He let it land this time without pushing it away. "I'll go to Cade," she said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm doing it because it's right. Not because you asked." "I know," he said. "That's exactly why I asked you." The third day arrived gray and cold, the kind of autumn morning that doesn't commit fully to being light. The sun somewhere behind thick cloud. The world illuminated but without warmth. The keep was already awake when Edrin came through the eastern gate at dawn. Through the gate this time, which announced itself with its familiar long complaint of metal against metal. He walked through the courtyard. People saw him. Some looked away. Some held his gaze. The warriors who had served under him 30 years ago, men in their 50s and 60s now, slower than they'd been, carrying the weight of those years differently than they'd expected to. They looked at him and nodded, slowly. The kind of acknowledgement that doesn't need words because the words would be insufficient. He nodded back and kept walking. The Alliance Council session was called for mid-morning. The Great Hall arranged differently than usual. The long tables moved aside. Chairs set in a formal arc for the council members. Brecon Wolf at the center, his territory being the neutral ground that made him the natural chair. To his left and right, the other voices. Warwick from the Western Territory, Dunmore from the North, and 3 others whose names and family seals Edrin had known since he was a boy, and the Voss representatives. Cade was there. In the heir's chair, a seat that had not been occupied in 20 years, he looked like he hadn't slept, which was probably accurate, but he was there, present. The set of his jaw that Edrin recognized from the training ground 20 years ago. The way Cade's face looked when he had decided something and was not going to undecide it. Solvane sat 2 chairs to his left. Close enough to be clearly aligned, far enough to give him room. Aldrick sat in the Alpha's chair. His expression controlled. Edrin had to give him that much. Whatever was happening underneath, the surface held. The look of a man who believed, or was performing belief convincingly enough, that the difference stopped mattering. That he had a path through this. Driva was not in the formal seating. She stood at the edge of the hall, watching everything and saying nothing. Edrin came in last. He walked to the open space at the front of the chamber. Not a chair, just the floor, and stood. Iron and granite came in behind him. The hall absorbed this. The council members took it in. Some of them had not seen iron and granite yet, had only heard the accounts from the execution circle. Seeing was different from hearing. It was always different. Brecon called the session to order. Driva moved first. Of course she did. Before the formal proceedings could begin, she stepped forward from the hall's edge and addressed the council directly. "I wish to raise a procedural challenge," she said. Her voice was perfect. Steady, reasonable, the voice of someone raising a sensible administrative concern rather than a last attempt to close a door before it opens fully. The call for this session was made by a party whose heir status is itself under dispute, until that dispute is resolved by the existing pack authority. The existing pack authority, Brecon said, is the precise question before this council. Exactly. Which creates a circular. The call was made, Cade said. Everyone looked at him. He hadn't raised his voice, was still seated. He was looking at Driva directly. The call was made under the documentation of my grandfather's declaration. That documentation is currently in Brecon Wolf's custody and available for inspection by any council member who requests it. He paused. If you want to contest my standing to call this session, contest it with the document. Not with the idea of documents. A silence. Driva looked at him. Cade looked back. Something passed between them that Edrin watched from across the hall. He could not have described it precisely, but he saw the exact moment Driva understood, genuinely understood, not suspected, that she had miscalculated something fundamental about the man she had spent 3 years directing. Stepped back, didn't leave, but stepped back, and the session began. It took 2 hours. The documents reviewed, the declaration read aloud in full by the council's formal reader. An older man with the specific sonorous precision of someone who has spent decades reading legal text and understands the weight each word is meant to carry. The territorial agreements cross-referenced. The timelines established. Aldrick had legal counsel, someone retained in the past month, which told Edrin something about how long Aldrick had understood this moment might come. The council raised objections, technical, procedural, the kind designed to introduce enough uncertainty that the council might choose to defer. Brecken handled each one methodically. Warwick, the oldest council member, who had known Edrin's father personally, said nothing during the procedural arguments, just sat and watched. When the final objection had been raised and answered, he said simply, "The document is clear. The law is clear. I vote to recognize Dunmore." Recognized the others one by one. When it reached the two members Dreva had been counting on, the ones she had told Aldrick would hold, they sat for a moment, looked at each other, looked at the hall, looked at Aldrick. "Recognized," said the first. "Recognized," said the second. "Done." Aldrick stood. He had sat through 2 hours of it with the stillness of a man refusing to let anything surface, and now he stood. Not decisively, not gracefully. Just up, the chair scraping back. The sound of it too loud in the hall's quiet. "This is not legitimate," he said. His voice was different now. The performance was gone. What remained was something rawer, not rage exactly. The specific desperation of a man watching the story he has lived inside for 20 years dissolve in public. "I have led this pack for 20 years. I kept it safe. I made the decisions that had to be made." "You made decisions I didn't authorize," Edrin said. He hadn't moved. Still standing in the open space at the front of the hall. Same posture he'd had walking in. Aldrick turned to him. "You were broken," Aldrick said. "You had nothing. You know that's not true. The pack had leadership," Edrin said. "Entirely level. You chose to replace it before anyone established it was gone. You were." "Say it," Edrin said. A silence. "Say what you actually did," Edrin said. "Not the version you've been telling for 20 years. The actual version. Say it here. In this hall. In front of these people." Just. Once the hall was completely still, Aldrick stood. For a long moment he stood, and then something happened to his face. Not a sudden collapse. More like the failure of a structure that has been under too much load for too long. The surface holding, and then simply not anymore. He sat back down, said nothing, which was, in its way, the only answer that mattered. Brecken declared the session concluded. The council filed out. The pack members who had come as witnesses, and there were many, the hall had been full, began to move. The particular sound of 300 people releasing a breath they'd been holding for different lengths of time. Edrin stood in the open space at the front of the hall, watched the faces. The warriors coming forward, not crowding him, not performing allegiance, just moving in his direction the way iron moves toward what calls to it. Without needing to announce the reason. Carrick, the elder, crossed the hall and stopped in front of him. Did not speak. Edrin nodded. Once, Carrick nodded back, and that was entirely sufficient. He found Aldrick in the corridor outside the hall, not looking for him. The corridor was between the hall and the eastern courtyard, and Edrin was going to the eastern courtyard, and Aldrick was there, carrying his formal coat over his arm. Looking, for the first time in memory, like a man instead of a position. They stood in the corridor. Neither spoke for a moment. "You could have done this years ago," Aldrick said finally. "Yes. Why didn't you?" "Because doing it years ago would have required making you the enemy," Edrin said. "And I spent a long time trying to find a way where that wasn't what it had to be. It was always what it had to be. I wasn't sure." Aldrick looked at him, something complicated moving through his face. "You were always certain of everything." "I was never certain of anything," Edrin said. "I was just slower to change direction." "A silence the pack," Aldrick said. What happens to? You can stay, if you choose to, as a member, not in leadership. Edrin paused. That choice belongs to you. I'm not sending you away. Aldrick's expression shifted. Like the answer had landed wrong. Not too harsh, but too reasonable. Harder to carry than punishment in some ways. Why? He said. Because you're my brother, Edrin said. Whatever else is also true, that remains true. And I'm very tired of war. He walked past Aldrick, through the corridor. Into the eastern courtyard. Into the gray autumn morning, Dreva was waiting, standing at the far end of the courtyard. Alone. No position, no leverage, no allies in arm's reach. A woman standing in cold morning light, she looked. Not defeated. Dreva was not someone who would look defeated, but there was a quality to her stillness that was different from her usual precision. This stillness was not managed. It was real. He stopped a few feet away. Neither spoke. You're going to ask what happens to me, she said. I was going to let you ask, Edrin said, then I'll ask. What happens to me? What do you want? She looked at him, like the question was unexpected. I want to leave. On my own terms. Then leave on your own terms. A pause. That's it. That's it. She was quiet, looking at him with the focus of someone very good at reading situations, who has encountered one she cannot read clearly. You should want to. I know what I should want, Edrin said. I've been told what I should want for 20 years. I've learned to be careful about that advice. I tried to have you killed. Yes, twice. The second attempt was more professionally organized. I'll give you that. Something moved across her face. Not amusement. The faint outline of where it might have been, in a different version of this moment. You're a strange man, she said. I've been told. What about Katie? And here, for the first time since he'd known her, the composure wavered. Just slightly. Just enough to see through. What about him? Edrin said. She stopped. Reorganized. He was never just a position to me. Whatever else I was doing. Whatever the structure of it was. He was not only that. Edrin looked at her for a long moment. I believe you, he said. You shouldn't, probably. But I do. He paused. That doesn't change what you did or what you were planning. But it changes what I understand about you. He held her gaze. Cade will need time. Whatever existed between you. And I believe something did. It existed inside a structure of deception. He needs to figure out which parts were real and which parts were the structure. You can't help him do that by staying. She was very still. No, she said finally. I can't. She picked up the bag she had set against the courtyard wall, already packed. She had understood, somewhere in the morning, that this was where the day would end. She walked toward the gate. At the edge of the courtyard, she stopped without turning. He was good, she said. He is good. Whatever I did, that part was real. Edrin said nothing. She walked through the gate, and was gone. The formal recognition happened that afternoon. Not ceremony. Not celebration. Not yet. Just the formal transfer. Documents signed. Council witnesses. The full body of the Voss territory assembled in the courtyard under the pale autumn sky. Brecken read the declaration. Edrin stood at the front, iron and granite behind him. The reading took 7 minutes. Legal language, careful and precise. When it was done, Brecken looked up and said, The council recognizes Edrin Voss as the lawful alpha of the Voss Territorial Authority. Effective as of the original declaration date, uninterrupted, which meant it had always been, which meant 20 years of Aldrick's authority had been, in the formal legal sense, a structure built on nothing. Edrin thought about what his father had anticipated when he wrote that word. Uninterrupted, one word, small enough that no one contesting the document would have thought to contest it, large enough that it meant everything now. The courtyard was quiet. Then Brenner, 60 years old, who had served in Edrin's formation 30 years ago, took a single step forward and bowed his head, not dramatically, not with any flourish, just a man inclining his head toward the alpha he had originally served, then another, and another. starting from the older warriors and moving through the crowd like something slow and absolutely inevitable. Not everyone, some held back, uncertain, still processing, but enough. More than enough to feel the weight of it. Cade and Solvane stood together at the edge of the crowd, not bowing. They were family, but standing, clearly, visibly, without any ambiguity at all. On his side of the courtyard, Edrin looked at his children for a moment, then looked away before something showed in his face that he would rather carry privately. He found Cade at the old training ground. Of course he did, because that was where Voss men went when they needed to think. Had always been where they went. His father, him, and now, apparently, Cade, who had never been told this, who had absorbed it through some channel that had nothing to do with instruction. Everything to do with something older than instruction. Sitting on the fallen log. Not moving. Looking at the overgrown markers. Edrin came and sat beside him, close. The way they hadn't sat since Cade was small enough not to think about how close was appropriate. Neither spoke. The training ground was gray and quiet. The autumn light was coming through the trees now. Thin and pale, but present. The clouds had shifted. She's gone, Cade said. Yes. I watched from the upper window. A pause. I didn't go down. I know. Part of me wanted to. That's natural, is it? Cade's voice was flat, not angry, looking for the floor. I spent 3 years building a version of the future around what I thought she was. And now I'm trying to figure out which parts were real and which parts were. Some of them were real, Edrin said. That's what makes it the complicated kind. The betrayals that were entirely false are almost easier. The ones mixed with something genuine are the ones that take the longest. Cade looked at him. You're speaking from experience. I spent 20 years living beside a lie my brother told about me. In the same house. Mixed is harder. Yes, Cade was quiet. What happens now? He said. Now you learn to run a territory, Edrin said. Simply, not as a heavy thing, as a fact. It's work. Good work. You're more prepared than you think. Because of her. Because of you. She pushed you in certain directions. But you were the one who had to actually do the things. The decisions you made, the right ones, were yours. And the wrong ones, also yours. Edrin looked at him. That's how it works. You don't get to disclaim the bad decisions because someone encouraged them. That's also what growth is. Cade made a sound. Short and slightly rueful. That's a generous interpretation of 3 years of catastrophically bad judgment. You're 28, you're 52, and you just walked out of an execution circle. Fair point. Edrin almost smiled. We've both had a difficult month. Cade looked at the old training ground. The worn paths. The markers still standing at their original intervals. I remember this place, he said. You brought me here once. I was 8, maybe. You were trying to show me the old footwork patterns. You complained the entire time. I know. I was 8. A pause. I didn't understand why it mattered. Do you understand now? I'm starting to. They sat with that. The light was better. Still pale. Still thin. But the clouds had shifted and the ground was visible in it, and the shapes of the old training ground were clear. I need to ask you something, Cade said. Ask the 8 years. He paused. The 11 years. The 16. He paused between each number. All the years I was standing on the wrong side of things. He stopped. How do you? He didn't finish, which was fine, because Edrin understood exactly what was being asked. Not logistically, not procedurally. What was being asked was, is there a way back from this? The question all men eventually ask about the things they got wrong, and the years they can't recover. The oldest question. The one without a clean answer. One day, Edrin said. Then another one. Cade looked at him. That's it? That's all it ever is. You don't fix 20 years in a single conversation. You don't undo 10 years with one right decision. Edrin held his son's eyes. You just keep moving in the right direction, long enough, consistently enough, and eventually the years of that start to outnumber the other years. He paused. It takes time. But it moves. It always moves. Cade was quiet. Then he nodded. Once. The way Edrin had nodded at Carrick. The way sufficient understanding passes between people who don't need to perform more than they mean. Okay, Cade said. Okay. That night, Brecken stayed. They sat in the study. Edrin's study now, for the first time. The room still carrying the marks of Aldrick's 20 years in it. Different furniture, different organization. The particular smell of someone else's decisions accumulated over 2 decades. He would change it. Not tonight, but in time. 2 lanterns. The same bottle from Brecken's study 2 nights ago. The same silence of old men who have known each other long enough to not need to fill it. Your father would have found this week very satisfying, Brecken said. He would have found it overdue. Same thing for him. Brecken turned his glass. He was a patient man. But he preferred things in their right order. He was more patient than me. He had more practice. Brecken looked at him. What comes next? Edrin considered. The territory needs work. 20 years of decisions made by someone who understood politics better than land. There are things to rebuild. Agreements to renegotiate. People to actually talk to. He paused. It's a great deal of work. Is that a complaint? No. And he found, saying it, that he meant it entirely. No, it isn't. And the children. Cade needs time and something real to be responsible for. Genuine responsibility. Not the kind Driva was managing from behind him. He'll be good at it. Edrin was entirely certain of this. He just needs the room to find that out for himself. And Solvain. Solvain has been ready for years. She's been doing the actual work without the title. She'll probably be better than either of us eventually. Brecken made a sound. Approval, roughly. Your father said that. Almost exactly those words. About you. When you were about her age, Edrin looked at him. He said, that one is going to be better than me. I just need to have the sense to get out of the way. The lantern light was steady. The study was quiet. He got out of the way, Edrin said. He did. Brecken raised his glass slightly. Eventually we all do. The question is whether we do it with any grace or get carried out without it. He chose gracefully. He did. A pause. What will you choose? Edrin thought about the question. About 20 years of choosing silence, and what it cost, and what it built, without his fully knowing what was being built. About the seal that held, and the night it stopped holding. About chains and old stone, and a blood moon, and a sun who looked away, and then, months later, looked back. About the things that can't be measured in outcomes, that live in the space between what you gave up and what you chose instead. And whether the choosing was worth it. Gracefully, he said. When the time comes. Good. Brecken drank. Then we have work to do before it does. Yes, Edrin agreed. We do. He went up to the roof that night. The keep had a rooftop walk, original to the building, his great-grandfather's addition, practical in the old days for watching the borders. Nobody used it anymore. The stairs were narrow. The footing required attention. He came out into the cold night air. The sky had cleared completely. The same moon that had hung over the execution circle a few nights ago was here now. Still large, still cold, but not red anymore, just white. The ordinary white of an autumn moon doing its ordinary work, illuminating a territory that had been in a particular kind of darkness for a long time. Iron came up the stairs behind him. Barely fit. Had to turn sideways at the narrow part. Grey Knight did not attempt the stairs. Was somewhere below, which was fine. Granite had always understood that some things were better observed from a certain distance. Iron came and stood beside Ams on the rooftop walk. They looked out over the territory, the keep, the training grounds, both the new ones and the old ones at the borderland edge, the southern fields, the northern ridge, the eastern fence line with the original marker posts, still standing at their original intervals, unmaintained for decades, standing anyway, all of it exactly as it had been, all of it completely different. How do you feel? Iron asked. Same question Granite had asked at the Borderlands camp. When Edrin had said, Like a house after everything that had been stored in it too long is finally gone. He thought about it again now. Different, he said. Different how? He looked out at the territory. The moonlight across it. The shapes he had known his entire life. Less hollow. Iron was quiet. Is that enough? Edrin stood in the cold night air. 52 years old, gray at the temples, a scar that pulled when the weather changed. The weight of 20 years finally set down, not gone, because nothing carried that long is simply gone, but set down. Put in its proper place. Yes, he said, because it was, because standing here, on his own roof, in his own territory, with his children somewhere in the rooms below, and his oldest friend in the study with a glass of something older than either of them, was enough. More than enough. The moon moved slowly across the sky, doing what moons do. The wind came in from the northern ridge, the way it always did at this hour, cold and clean, and carrying the smell of the season, finishing itself and giving way to whatever came next. Edrin Voss stood on the rooftop walk and breathed. Just breathed. The first breath in 20 years that was not held against something. Not maintaining the seal, not careful, not measured, not the breathing of a man carrying something he couldn't set down. Just breath, in and out. Iron stood beside him. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Some things don't need words. Some things are simply enough. And this was.